Hopefully this works. We're live.
Yes.
Here we are.
Hey,
We're
hi.
I didn't know if Facebook was going to throw us a couple weird loops. I know Facebook has been acting iffy today, but I think we're back on. So I have Julia here with me. I'm Jenna Overbaugh. I will go over intros because it's been such a long time since I've been on one of these webinars. And yeah, we're going to get into some intros here, but welcome everybody. Now is your opportunity to get your questions answered about OCD, about exposure and response prevention, about treatment kind of recovery stuff in general. So yeah, feel free to contribute a question or a comment, and we'll do our best to answer them live for you here today. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Jenna. My name is Jenna Overbaugh. I'm a therapist here at OCD. I've been working with the OCD population since 2008. And I really love this work. I especially love the treatment for it. I think it's just incredible, and how we can get people better so consistently and so quickly. I love every aspect of that. So I also have Julia here today. I love coming on with guests, especially advocates who have lived experience with OCD. So I will let Julia introduce herself, and then I think they have a little kind of analogy, like a little activity that they want to share. So I'll let you go for it, Julia.
Hey, everybody. My name is Julia, and I'm here today because I've lived my own experience with pretty severe OCD. And when it was pretty bad for me, it really felt like nothing will ever gonna change, and it's just going to be horrible. And my case is the worst. And I think I'm here today to just kind of um, let everybody know that you can do it. You can turn this page around, and you can just make your life beautiful and overcome OCD. And there is hope.
Awesome. I love that. I love when we have advocates here, especially like when they've gone through, exposure and response prevention. And as soon as you and I talked, I was like, oh yeah, she gets it. She gets it. She's going to be consistent with like everything that we preach here. So, yeah, why don't we'll answer a couple questions, and then maybe
Okay.
we'll take like a little intermission and you can explain your little demonstration. Okay. Sound good?
Yeah, of course.
Cool. So guys, I don't go in order. I just scroll and pick one. So if I didn't get to your question, it doesn't mean that I won't get to it. Just we'll do the best that we possibly can, but I don't go in order. Julia, this might be good for you to ask or to answer. So how do you have your parents understand your OCD? So, from the perspective of someone who's kind of been there, I know I see it on the opposite end, right? I see a lot of times like having to have those conversations or work with children and adolescents. So what's some of your advice as someone who struggled to try to get your loved ones to understand?
So, actually, it's very interesting that this is the first question, because me and my husband were just talking about it like 30 minutes ago about my experience when I was a kid and I had OCD, and I had no clue that it was OCD. Basically, all my family was just saying, that's just the way she is. She's just like overly nervous about stuff. And I remember I would do little rituals. I had this like major fear that something is going to happen to my mom. And I would do little rituals, like, for example, if I run from my bedroom to the kitchen and don't breathe, then my mom is going to be fine. And I remember that, like, actually, my mom didn't help me at all because she was just providing a lot of reassurance, because she didn't know anything about the experience of OCD, what it's like. She just thought that that's the way I am. And she would always reassure me. And up until now, she is still kind of in a way that they're just like, you'll be fine. Everything is fine. You have nothing to worry
Your
about. So
motherly instinct.
yes. So I kind of I decided that me and my OCD, it's something that just like I have to deal with myself, kind of, because nobody else will understand if they don't have this experience. What I told her to do is I explained multiple triggers that I have, and I specifically explained to her not to give me any reassurance. So even though she doesn't understand right now still what it's like to actually have OCD, she always just says, is it the like, are you asking me a question or is it your OCD? And I would be like, yeah, you're right, that's my OCD. But my husband, actually, he is the one who really got involved, and he was the one who helped me a lot through my recovery and through the whole process. And he is really good at recognizing like when to when I'm actually asking for reassurance or I'm doing a compulsion. But that took a very long time because at first it also was a very difficult process for him to understand. So it took a lot of understanding and explanation. And also, I took him to a couple of the therapy sessions with me because some of the OCD triggers that I had, they were so just like kind of taboo that I didn't feel like talking to him openly without anybody explaining and being like mitigated between us would be a good idea. So I think that if it's possible, maybe involving a therapist um, who will be able to explain to the person that doesn't understand what's OCD like would be a great idea. And also a lot of communication. And also, if your loved ones don't understand, it doesn't mean that you're not going to recover. It just means that you have to put a little more work. Just be stronger so you can recognize yourself when you're actually looking for that reassurance and stop yourself.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is all great. And I would also add that the International OCD Foundation has a lot of great resources for family members, like really great, just really quick tidbits on kind of what is OCD, what is not OCD, how as loved ones to respond. Um, but yeah, I love what Julia said, just as far as, we want them to understand. That would be amazing if they did. It always, OCD already feels so isolating. And so when your closest family members can't understand it, it can just feel really isolating. But I would encourage you to keep in mind that there's a great community here, especially at No CD, of other individuals who have OCD just like you, or maybe not specifically your theme, but probably specifically your theme or themes too. So feel free to reach out to that community as well using our in-app forum. Our support groups are a great resource as well. So hopefully that's helpful.
And the app was very helpful for me to actually, because when you can't talk to somebody who, when your loved ones don't know what it's like, and you go on the app and you just have a whole community of people, that's very helpful. So I would recommend that as well. And I
Awesome.
hope that answered the question.
Yeah, we got to thank you. So yes, I'm sure that was helpful to them. So kind of I see a couple questions about real event OCD slash false memory OCD, and I like kind of just grouping these together because they're approached the same. Like my advice for them would be the same. So I'll try to. Okay, so here's one question. How should I deal with false memory OCD, and how can I do an exposure? So for those of you out there who aren't familiar with false memory OCD, this is kind of an intrusive experience where someone feels like they maybe had a memory of something that happened, but their lack of memory rather kind of incites this doubt that what if something happened and I don't know about it. A good example is in postpartum. I used to have false memory OCD kind of themes come up. I used to think that I had memories or thoughts about like, well, what if I was so sleep deprived that I hurt my child and I don't know about it? So it could be like that. So we'll try to tackle false events or false memory OCD and then real event OCD. Trying to find the question. But essentially, real event OCD it could be anything, right? It's kind of this phenomenon where someone's anxiety or someone's doubt kind of latches onto an event that legitimately probably did happen or to some degree happened. There's some elements of reality to it, but obsessive doubt can kind of exacerbate that, and further compulsions can make that worse. And so again, I lump these together because it doesn't matter whether it happened or whether it didn't. That's not the point. So again, like false memory OCD and real event OCD, I don't see them as that different, other than the fact that one might have happened, like there may be some legitimacy to it, versus this other one, like we would all agree that probably didn't happen. But in any case, right, like there has to be this level of, regardless of what happens, how is my response of compulsing around this and continuing to ruminate about it and seek reassurance and trying to remember this happening or not happening? How is that working, right? Like, how is that actually helping you get closer to the solution that you want, which is a conclusion, which is feeling 100% certain? And chances are the answer is no, that it feels like it's really a strong pull for you to try to remember. It feels like it makes sense that if you just think about it enough, then you'll get there. If you just think about it one more time, then you'll think about it and it'll be clear to you. But research shows that that is actually the opposite of true. So they've done plenty of research, a lot of experiments actually about checking behaviors and the confidence in your memory. So this is like total nerd moment, but this applies to all rituals. So I don't care whether it's checking a lock, checking a doorknob, checking an iron or an oven. It could be checking to make sure your hands are clean, checking to make with your spouse to make sure that you didn't cheat on them or that they're not cheating on you. Like literally whatever ritual, what I'm saying will apply. They've done research to show that the more that you check something, whether, a lock, doorknob, whatever, you would think that the more I check this thing, I'm going to be more confident in my memory of that. Like I check that stove 100 times. I should be more confident in the fact that I turn that stove off, right? Wrong. The opposite is true. The 100th time that you've checked that stove or your memory or checked in with your spouse or checked Google, literally whatever it is that you're ritualizing over, you'd think that you'd be more confident the more that you do that thing. You're actually less confident. So the 100th time that you check something, you're actually less confident than the 99th time you've checked it. You're less confident the 100th time than you are the first time you checked it. So the reality of the situation is you're never going to be 100% certain about how this thing happened or whether this thing happened. But we have to know that by continuing to ruminate about it, by continuing to ask questions about it or try to piece everything together, you're actually getting further and further away from that feeling of the solution. And so my solution for you guys is to try to just accept and allow that lack of a conclusion and really try to commit to not figuring it out. And it's going to feel really scary. It's going to feel awful. It's going to feel like, how could I possibly do that? If we commit to not answering the question, eventually we'll be able to sit with that. Eventually our brains will get the message that we don't necessarily have to ruminate about these things, that this thing is not actually super threatening. And most importantly, that me ruminating about this is not the way to go about solving the problem. Julia, did you have anything else that you wanted to add about false memory and or about real event OCD?
Yes, can you hear me now? I think I lost the connection for a second.
You're good. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add? And someone was asking, someone asked if I also have OCD or am I just a therapist? I was always a therapist, always studied OCD, and then I really struggled in postpartum. So that was a really difficult time for me. I've been open about that in the past. So yeah, a lot of my examples come from the postpartum period. I have a 3.5, so I went through exposure and response prevention. And I feel like it gave me a really good, but really scary perspective into what you all deal with on a daily basis. So go ahead, Julia. What's your thoughts on false memory OCD / real event OCD?
I really loved your answer, Jenna. Everything is just so accurate. And I think that actually my literal presentation here would be a perfect example to summarize all that. When I was going through my own OCD, and just for a background, I feel like I've dealt with probably 80% of all the topics that exist. I've had all kind of, I thought I was afraid that I'm not going to fall asleep. I had somatic OCD. I struggled big time with existential OCD. I struggled big time with OCD around developing depression or schizophrenia. I had the personalization and the realization. That was a big issue as well. And so what I have here right now, I'm just gonna start. So I have this little jar, and this jar represents our mind. And that's what we're all basically striving for. This clear water, it's our bright mind state of calmness and relaxation. And all the stuff in the bottom, all the glitter, that's our fears, our OCD thoughts, anxiety, and basically phobias, everything that we don't really like and don't enjoy. And when you look at it like that, you can still see like it's still there, it's not going anywhere, but it's in the back of your mind. And so it doesn't really bother you. It's not stopping you from living your beautiful life and enjoy every moment. What happens when you have an OCD spike? Well, something like this happens, and all this glitter starts to go up. If you don't do anything about it and you just let it run its course, it's just slowly gonna stop going down, and eventually you're going to return back to your peaceful state. But unfortunately, we people with OCD and anxiety, that's what we continue to do with our reassurance.
And
And
someone before was asking about coping skills. Like, what coping skills would you recommend? Julia, I love that. I have chills.
so basically, every time you try to reassure yourself, do a compulsion, ask for reassurance from other people, try to analyze, try to do whatever you want to offset your anxiety. This is what you're doing to your anxiety and your OCD. And that's how bad it gets. And then for me, what was the biggest issue when I finally learned all that I have to sit with uncertainty and just let it be, I was like, well, I've been not thinking about it for. Ah,
We can hear you.
but you can hear me. Oh my God, my computer went down just a second. I'm so sorry.
This is such a good demonstration too, you guys. That's why I love Julia. We're on the edge of our seats. I need to make one of these. It's such a good demo.
Okay, I think I'm back. My
We can hear
computer.
you. We can see you.
And you can see me too? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So, and basically, what was my biggest issue? I was like, okay, I'm not thinking about this for 2 hours, and I'm resisting compulsions for 2 hours, and I'm still like feeling anxious. What's going on? Nothing is gonna help. But that's because when you shake it for so long, it's not gonna go down immediately in a second. It's going to take time. It's gonna take some time because you've been wiring those circuits in your.
Oh man, we lost her, but I know where she was going. So until I get her back, we're going to keep going. So what she was trying to demonstrate for you guys was essentially that what we're having you guys do is resist your rituals, right? We're having you guys resist your compulsions, and your brain isn't going to just automatically be like, oh, okay, no big deal. I understand now. I get it. Your brain has one function, which is to keep you alive. Your brain has one function that's to keep you alive. It doesn't care about keeping you happy. It doesn't care about keeping you safe, comfortable. It cares only about, are you safe? Are you okay right now in this moment? And so every time that you guys are anxious, every time you guys have an urge and you do a compulsion, you're basically telling your brain, you're telling your amygdala, this thing is scary. You need to protect me from these things in the future. Please note, brain, this is bad. This is emergent. This is an emergency. Please respond this way in the future as though this is an emergency. Now, what Julia was saying and what we're asking you guys to do is to essentially just let all that glitter be up and about and let it all feel flustery. Let your brain feel that anxiety. Let your body feel that anxiety. And even though you're resisting your rituals, it's not going to just go away. It's not going to just go away. It's going to take some time. And here she's back. I was just explaining kind of what you were thinking. But it's going to take some time for your brain to be like, okay, I get it now. Your brain isn't going to be like, oh, okay, you've told me for years that this was an emergency. Now, all of a sudden, of your own accord, you're telling me that you're not going to ritualize anymore. I'm not on board with that just yet. So I'm going to release epinephrine and freak you out and make your adrenaline go like haywire. that's why even when you're resisting a ritual and when you're letting your anxiety just be there and you're letting all that glitter from Julia's demonstration, you're just letting it kind of settle. That's why it still feels kind of all over the place, because your amygdala is just responding to what you've been telling it this whole time. It's going to take time for you to lay down new neural networks of you behaving as though this thing is not threatening. It's going to take time and new corrective learning experiences for you to rewire your brain to realize, okay, I guess I can calm down. I guess I can take a day off. I guess I can take an hour off or a minute off. Julia, you can wrap up. I just tried to hop in where you ended.
Well, I'm so sorry, guys, for my technical difficulties. I'm not sure what's going on with my laptop. It just knows that I'm doing this important thing for me today. That's why I just doing
That's
all
okay.
that.
We roll with it.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and it's just it's very important to just let your brain just roll with whatever it can tell you, whatever, anything. It doesn't matter. That's not about your thoughts that you have. It's about the way you react to them, and you teach your brain to say whether it's important or not. And it can be very difficult because OCD really grabs on our biggest values. That's why just like you can't like how can I sit with this? It's so important. I need to make sure that I figure this out. I need to make sure that I find a solution. And but that never works. And also one more thing that I want to mention is that what I learned for myself is that my OCD is not something horrible that's trying to ruin my life. It's actually something so good about me that my brain, that like little part inside of me, it doesn't hate me. It actually loves me so much. This love is just very crazy, but it loves me so much. That's why it's doing all that, because it wants to protect me. So also changing your beliefs and thinking more about like, well, like what is the bright side of having this? It's very hard to actually sit and just admit that like maybe there are some good things that OCD is doing for me, or maybe maybe there is something good that it tells about me. And that was also important, because just recognizing your values and also knowing that like for example, like when I had a lot of existential fears and existential OCD, um, I really learned that like I value life, and that's why it's grabbing for the most important thing. So,
Yeah, 100%. I've never worked with anybody who had obsessive compulsive disorder about like this random person from 10 years ago that they don't really remember their name or care about. And it's always about what they care about, because OCD wants your attention. OCD wants your attention, and that's it. And the reason why these themes work for you is because that's what gets your attention. Cool. Awesome. I love that. That was a really good demonstration. And so I think this is a good like follow up to the jar that you were talking about, Julia. So how to deal with OCD latching on when having a panic attack and essentially making the panic last longer. So my interpretation, if I were to answer this in lieu of like the jar that you were just talking about, this would be the equivalent of when you finally like let everything's like all jumbled up, right? Like the jar's all jumbled up and everything's kind of all messy and cloudy. And then you stop for a second and then you're like, oh my gosh, it's not falling fast enough. It's not falling fast enough. And you try to like shake it to make it come down faster. But what ends up happening is that you end up just flustering it all back together. That would be like my interpretation of it. My other like really good go-to analogy, and I forget who originated it. It belongs to someone, so it's not mine. But panic is essentially like being in a car going like 80 miles an hour and the brakes go out. So you've kind of like gone offline. You've gone off of your kind of ability to like hone in on like one thing, like you're in panic mode and you're just, you're up there in terms of your anxiety, right? So your car is going 80 miles an hour. The brakes are out. what you try to do to decelerate the car to make it go slower is you try to hit the brakes, right? Like we all probably would, but the brakes don't work. And so you're accidentally actually hitting on the pedal. So you're accidentally hitting on the accelerator in your attempt to decelerate and to calm down and to slow down the car. The brakes are out. So you're actually making your car go faster. When really what we need to do, even though this seems really scary when you're going 80 miles an hour, you need to allow the car to come down to a slow pace or stop completely on its own, which is really, really scary and literally counterintuitive to what you would probably think going into a panic attack or in the moment of a panic attack. But really, we want you to just try to describe and experience what's going on versus judging what's going on. So my advice with panic attacks is to try to just describe what's going on versus judging what's going on, right? Like describing what's going on in a way that's like a third party perspective wouldn't be able to argue versus like, this is bad, this is awful, I need to stop this now. It's like, whoa, my heart rate is getting up there. I am not feeling good right now. I'm here, a little short of breath. You know, that continuing to get anxious about anxiety is going to, you're hitting the gas pedal at that point. Julia, what do you think?
For me, sarcasm actually helps a lot. Being sarcastic about my panic attack is actually a very good way because I usually, when I had panic attacks, I would create these horrible catastrophic events that would happen. Either I'm going to go into psychosis right now, or I'm going to have a heart attack, and or like it's going to be a very massive heart attack. And I would imagine everything in little details. And for me, what works is actually to start being sarcastic with myself and just say, yeah, I'm going into psychotic break right now, right this second. I'm already psychotic probably. And the same thing with heart attack. And I usually would also say to myself, yeah, if it's a heart attack, I would rather just like, then it means that probably have only 2 more minutes to live. So I better spend it very good. Have a good time for the last 2 minutes and just be as sarcastic as you can because it's going to take, because you need to show to your brain that those thoughts are irrelevant and your panic is irrelevant as well at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And the
And that
less
you're open to it, that you're willing to have that experience, that you
absolutely.
are welcoming it, that you're bringing it with you, because that resistance to it and the avoidance of it and the judging of it is what makes it harder to come down.
And also, you had plans for today, and then you wanted to go see your friends, you wanted to do your homework or go to work. Well, then go to work and be and tell yourself, I'll be having a panic attack all day, but I'll still continue to go to work and do my thing, and I'll feel horrible, but I'll continue doing whatever I planned to do.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Yeah, and I think that like secondary avoidance, right? Like, oh man, like I don't want to. I'm like having the worst panicky episode ever right now. Like I can't possibly jump online and like go to my Zoom happy hour with my friends. Like no way. No, keep doing it. Keep doing it because think of the message that you're sending to your brain. Like, okay, these symptoms are dangerous. These symptoms are dangerous. If it wasn't, then Julia wouldn't have avoided that Zoom call with her friends like she wanted to. So next time she feels those things, I'm really going to send the alarm because I want to protect her. So yeah, just be on the lookout for those subtle avoidances too. Something else that you could do if you kind of are in that situation where you have fear of fear, we call it kind of anxiety sensitivity. If you don't like those physiological sensations that accompany anxiety, one option that you could work on or just look up more about is interoceptives. It's basically a fancy word to describe body exposures. So the same way that we might have someone like hold on to something contaminated for a contamination exposure or look at a triggering picture for some type of other exposure, you could do interoceptives, which are body exposures. We might have you intentionally elicit these uncomfortable physiological sensations, feel it again, 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 bring it on. Maybe even like I have Julia before her planned Zoom call with her friends hold her breath for 60 seconds so that she goes into that Zoom call feeling short of breath and da da da. So you can pair things like that together too. And the idea is just like with exposures, you feel these things repetitively, you start to get used to them, and you start to realize that these sensations are uncomfortable. They're not dangerous, and they are two different things. Awesome. Oh, back to the beginning. See, I told you guys that I hop around. What advice can you give someone who is in therapy, doing exposure work and doing well, but has a hiccup in the form of an especially difficult day anxiety-wise beyond what's typical? I'll say this really quick, and then I'll let Julia take over, and then I'll probably come back. But before I forget, we need breakthrough symptoms in order to have you guys apply this treatment. So I would challenge you all, like, especially if you're in treatment, whether it's with a therapist or whether you're just doing this on your own and you are doing well, but then you have kind of like this breakthrough symptom where you have a hiccup, a difficult day anxiety-wise. I want you to remember, we need those breakthrough symptoms. Think of them like tests, right? These are little tests. This is a great opportunity for you to kind of take everything that you've been studying, that we've been teaching you in therapy, and kind of applying it, right? Like, that's the test. If we just had you do exposures and do exposures and do exposures and do exposures, and everything was hunky-dory outside of that, it would definitely not feel legitimate at all. And so we need those breakthrough symptoms kind of sporadically throughout treatment. It's a really great opportunity to learn more. It's a great opportunity to kind of learn from that and see, like, what were my triggers there? Like, what was going on? What was my thought process? What was the function of those rituals that I was doing? And what would be good exposures from that? Like, I think these little hiccups are great opportunities for you guys to start being your own therapists. Exposure therapy in particular, I think, is a skill, like a set of skills more so than an actual like therapy. And so I think it's something that the goal is eventually for you guys to be able to do it on your own, so that when you're done with your therapist, you can have a high anxiety day and be like, wow, what the heck happened? Like, that was really difficult for me. Bing, bang, boom. This is what some of my triggers were. I could see myself doing this compulsion and that compulsion. And yeah, the function of that was this. And okay, I have a great exposure idea. I'm going to start to do that tomorrow. So it can be a really great learning opportunity for sure. So don't get down on yourself. They happen, they're expected, and they can be really great opportunities. Go ahead, Julia. I'll find our next question.
I would also say not to get discouraged, because I think it's absolutely normal process. You always make a few steps forward and then a few steps back. And I've definitely had that where like I would be feeling very good for a good amount of time, for a couple of weeks, and then out of nowhere, all of a sudden, all of my anxiety comes back. And very like interesting that triggers that I was dealing with very well for the past couple of weeks, like for example today, become very triggering again and give me a full-blown anxiety. And I know how it can feel so horrible and so discouraging, because it makes you feel like, oh my god, nothing helped. Like it was just a little fluke. Like for 2 weeks I was just doing fine for some reason, but it's just going to get worse again. That's what I was telling myself. But I think it's not the case. We have all the tools. When you go through ERP, when you go through the therapy, you learn those tools. You cannot unlearn them. You can have a weak day, you can have a bad day, but if you start applying those tools, you will get back on track again very quickly. And just in those days, also, just like one advice: try very hard not to do any reassurance or any compulsions, because once you do at least one, it's just gonna roll into a one more, one more, one more, one more. Just sit with anxiety and accept it and honor it, that like you're just having a difficult day, you're just having a hard day, and it's fine, it's completely fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I have bad days. I've been doing this since 2008. I had a really bad year and a half in postpartum, and the goal is to not, I would challenge you all to consider that the goal of therapy and the goal of your recovery, it would be great, but the goal does not necessarily have to be the absence of anxiety, right? Or like, okay, my goal is to be able to do this and not be anxious. Like that would be ideal from a therapist perspective, from your guys' perspective. But sometimes the goal is just to do the difficult things and know that you can handle it. Like like I said, I have a 3.5-year-old. He's almost 4, and something that no matter how many times I've exposed myself to it, no matter how many times I like even go above and beyond, I still am so afraid of being alone with my son in like the hour or two in between when I get him from daycare and when my husband gets home. I can be alone with him for a week, but like it's something about those 1 or 2 hours where like I don't know, like it's just a short amount of time. I can't go out of the house, but it's enough time that something bad could happen. And like I've been doing that with him every single day for the past like 3.5 years. It's still anxiety provoking. Some days are easier than others. I can't identify any rituals that I'm doing, and it really helped me to just be able to like stop holding my breath and be like, it might always be a little bit anxiety provoking for me, but I do it and I keep doing it. And no matter, like, I still never do my old rituals that I used to do, like asking my husband when he was going to be home from work. That's what matters to me. So what matters to me has become more so like, am I doing the difficult things? Am I committing to my values and my goals and what I know is good for my recovery? It's still anxiety provoking, but I'm still doing it. Like I'm still showing up every single day and I'm going to keep showing up. But it's still really anxiety provoking. So don't cut yourself short. Just if something is still really anxiety provoking for you or you're having anxiety, the goal is not to get rid of it. The goal, that would be great and that might happen. But even if it doesn't, you're still doing great work, even if you continue to show up and do the work and it's still anxiety provoking. Let's see. They loved your self-talk, Julia, which I agree. I think like leaning into it is a great tactic.
Yeah. OCD doesn't like sarcasm, I think.
Yeah.
It's very afraid.
OCD doesn't like when you agree with it.
Yeah.
It wants you to back away, right? We're having a lot of questions about like, I'm really anxious to start therapy. How do I start therapy? And so, yeah, there are a couple. So we can just answer them quickly, kind of loop them all together. How do you decide on a therapist for the first time? The choices seem endless. Julia, I know you would agree with me. If we're talking about OCD, you absolutely need to see a provider who knows what exposure and response prevention is. It's not, unfortunately, enough for them to just say that they specialize in OCD. Many people say that they specialize in OCD, but they don't actually do ERP. They might do like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So like EMDR, they might do just more general CBT, which ends up being a lot more talk therapy. So you definitely need, if you have OCD, you definitely need someone who does exposure and response prevention. As far as deciding, it comes down a lot to logistics, right? Like who's available in your area. Obviously, no CD is available in all 50 states, and we can treat in and out of the United States. It comes down to your preferences as far as like teletherapy versus in person. Comes down to personal preference. Like maybe you can get to know a little bit about that therapist first. Things like insurance play a role. But Julia, what was helpful for you in like trying to identify a therapist?
Well, I went through a couple of therapists before I finally was able to find one through OCD that actually was helpful. And I think it's very important to make sure that you find a therapist that really specializes in OCD, because otherwise they're just gonna make it worse. Like with my example, and I think I mentioned that to Jenna previously, but when my OCD symptoms just started, I went through a couple of different therapists, going to them and saying, I'm afraid that I'm developing schizophrenia. And what they was all of them would say, Julia, you're fine. Don't worry, you're fine. You don't, and they would just continue giving me reassurance. And I went to my therapist for a good year, and I was talking every week, getting this reassurance from her that, like, you're fine. Everything is fine. You don't have to worry about it. And it was not helpful at all. It made it so much worse. And after a year of going to therapy, I realized that, okay, well, yeah, maybe some other aspects of my life got better, but my prime reason that I went to therapy is not solved, and it's actually worse. So
Mhm.
that's when I started searching for somebody who really specializes, because the therapist that I went to, she was also saying that she treats OCD. And she never even mentioned that she see anything in me that would be related to OCD. And I hit my rock bottom at that point. I lost 30 pounds. I started skipping work. I was so isolated. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. And I was sitting home a lot. I was afraid. I was having panic attacks just to go outside to the grocery store. It was very bad. And what's interesting is actually that's not a mental health professional, but my primary physician was able to diagnose me and say that you actually looks like and sounds like OCD. And the only reason he was able to do it was because his son struggled with OCD and struggled to find somebody who's going to help
Wow.
him.
I
So
was gonna say normally it's backwards, right? Like
yeah,
going
and
to
that
a
was the
primary care physician, they obviously there are exceptions, but it's hard to find one who is knowledgeable about OCD, especially non-traditional cases.
yes, that was, and honestly, that's why, like, that's another reason why I'm here, because I I'm sure that so many people struggle right now and they don't even know that it's OCD. And it feels so hopeless when you're in it and you don't even know what you're dealing with. That's why finding a therapist, a good one that actually specializes in OCD, it's crucial, very important.
Mhm. Awesome.
And also about starting a therapy, it could be very scary, but honestly, living with OCD is much worse.
Yes, and that was another like follow-up question that I'm trying to find. Kind of like it's how do you here we go. How do I reach out for help to an OCD therapist initially when the avoidance is so overwhelming? So go ahead.
It's still going to be at your pace. Uh, Nobody's going to push you to do something that you're not ready to do. They build a hierarchy and they start very slowly. If you're not comfortable going and doing some exposures that are extreme for you, nobody's going to force you to do it. But it's going to start gradually. And by the time you get to your biggest fear, you're going to be ready.
Mhm.
So, and you have so much support when you work with a therapist. It feels scary, but if you find the right one, if you find the one that you can connect with, it's going to feel so good and so rewarding and so warm and welcoming. So don't be afraid to do it. Just trust the process.
Yeah. And I have a lot to say about this. First of all, I think I go to therapy. It's anxiety provoking to go to therapy, right? Like don't wait to feel confident before you do it. Like it's okay to and you'll learn this throughout your exposure experience. It's okay. It's normal and it's good to do things when you're scared, right? Like do not wait. I think so often I'm guilty of it too. Like we wait for that feeling of courage before we can pull the trigger and do something that's scary. But the reality, or we wait for that moment of confidence, but really what we need is courage, right? And courage is when you do something even though you're scared. We wait to feel confident in reaching out for therapy. We wait to feel 100% confident in a therapist that we've selected, but really what we need to just allow ourselves to act on is courage. Courage is doing something when you're scared. And then eventually, I mean, that's all that it is, right? Like we're all just kind of rolling the dice. We're all rolling the dice in life. We're trying to just figure it out. Give yourself a try, right? Like you can
Yeah.
always back out, but try to think of this as like the first exposure, like the first and the most important exposure. Treat it like an exposure. Everything that we're talking to you about, you feel overwhelmed, you feel like you want to avoid therapy, treat it like an exposure. Do the small steps, like maybe even create a little bit of a hierarchy yourself. So maybe the first step is you download the app and you participate in our free in-app forum. You just start to engage in the community. Maybe the second step above that, it's a little bit more challenging, but you go to a support group, one of our free support groups. Maybe the third one is that you send one of our care teams a text message that you want to learn more information. Maybe the next step is that you actually call and just do that for free 15-minute phone call. Maybe you don't commit to it, but you're just doing the 15-minute phone call, and then just take it step by step. OCD and anxiety wants you to be out of therapy, having not done any of those steps, and be terrified that like treatment won't work. Like
And be isolated at home, and it's making you more and more isolated.
Yeah, and it wants you to think of like all the negative outcomes that are going to come from it now to like 3 months down the road when you're like in treatment, whatever. It's like, just, we're here right now. Like, it sounds really cliche, and it's a practice that coincides with ERP really nicely. And it's cliche, but it's so true. Like, we're here now. Like, what's that first step that we need to take? Like, we don't need to reach out to a therapist tonight, but maybe you download the app, and it can be whatever app. That's how my brain works. No CD. Maybe you download the app and you engage in our forum. Maybe you sign up for a support group. Little things like that. Just make your own little exposure hierarchy out of it. What else? We have time for a couple more. Dun, dun, dun. I love that someone called out my clock and how it's the wrong time. Oh, I love this one. Advice for OCD thoughts changing so often. So this is a common phenomenon. Nothing to be worried about, peeps. This happens all the time. It's hard to know if I'm doing exposures correctly when my OCD feels like it's always changing. It's like my OCD is making me doubt that I'm doing the work right. So Madeline, dear friends, it's nothing wrong with you. This is just OCD. This is something that I'm sure so many other people can resonate with. It's something that I hear about from people all the time. And it doesn't mean that you're sicker. It doesn't mean that you're more severe. It doesn't mean that you're complicated. It just means that you have OCD, and OCD is the doubt disorder, right? So I'm actually a really big believer in a lot of Dr. Reed Wilson's work. If you're curious about what I'm about to share, feel free to look him up. He has incredible resources on his YouTube page. He has a lot of books on this topic. But Dr. Reed Wilson is kind of a pioneer in the concept that that content doesn't really matter all that much, right? So like, obviously there are some subtypes that, not that they don't matter, right? Like they carry individual weight for that person, and obviously sexual intrusive thoughts and pedophilic OCD, like that carries a tabooness that other themes maybe necessarily don't have to deal with. And so I understand that part of it. But when it comes to this is why OCD themes change and can kind of feel like whack-a-mole. Like one season you're really hyper-focused on scrupulosity and like morality and whether there's a heaven and a hell. And then the next season you're worried about existential crises and unanswerable questions about the world that you can't answer. And then another season, those two things don't matter, but you've latched onto harm OCD or relationship OCD, and it just is a whack-a-mole. And it doesn't have to be that like spanned out. It can be pretty sporadically changing, like a moving target. The good news is that it doesn't matter. It's all doubt. It's all the same doubt. It's like the same monster wearing a different mask. It's literally like the same actor in a movie. And then like you're watching a totally different movie and you're like, oh my gosh, that's Leonardo DiCaprio. And he doesn't even look like Leonardo DiCaprio. Like Leonardo is not in these types of movies, but it's him. Oh my gosh, you're halfway in and you realize, oh my gosh, it's Leo. But it's all, don't get caught up in the content. At the end of the day, OCD is the doubt disorder. At the end of the day, you have a brain that doesn't like doubt. At the end of the day, you have a brain that wants certainty. You have a brain that wants you to know 100% you have a brain that can't move on until has closure. And as much practice you can give your brain to be cool with that, those anxiety provoking situations, no matter what scenario they come up in or what form they come up in, that's great. And so the good news is, if you learn and you really like adopt exposure and response prevention as a lifestyle, and you get really good and really vigilant at being like, oh yeah, that's doubt. Oh yeah, that's doubt over there. Oh yeah, that's doubt over there. You apply ERP the exact same way. I'm gonna approach this anxiety provoking thing. I'm gonna let myself feel anxious. I'm gonna let myself feel uncertain. Not uncertain that my partner loves me. Not uncertain that my hands are clean. Not uncertain, insert content here. I'm just gonna let myself feel uncertain, because life is full of uncertainties. Life is full of things that I think I can control, but I actually can't control. And I'm gonna sit with all of that. And the more that you can like go big, the more that you can kind of like abstract a level above and not get so caught up in the superficial content, the better off you'll be.
And I would like to add to that also that I remember having the same issue where my teams would switch like multiple times a day or a week. It was very difficult. It felt so overwhelming. But maybe try to look at it as not like you're doing ERP wrong. Maybe you're doing it good. And maybe the reason why it's switching so fast is because you're actually doing a good work and your brain is like, okay, she's not reacting to this. So I have to move on to something else because she is not really reacting to this thought anymore, but we need to make sure that she is anxious. So I'm going to prop up like this thought or this one and just make sure that we still have something to worry about. And you just keep doing ERP the same way and apply all your knowledge to every thought. And it doesn't matter how many thoughts or how many teams you get, just use the same tool.
I think of this as no different. This is no different than a kid. If I am in Target and my son says that he wants a toy, and let's say that he already got a toy or something, right? Like for some reason I'm saying no, which I'd probably say yes. But let's say that I had to say no. He's going to go right to his dad and ask, right? Now, what happens if my husband says yes? Now all of a sudden, he's going to be the preferred person who gets all the questions. And I know that I need to go to dad for all the questions in Target, right? So what my husband and I need to do, just like what you need to do, regardless of where your theme is, like wherever your urges are going in the direction of, you need to stay consistent. The same way that my husband and I need to stay consistent in our application of like saying no, like, no, we're not getting a toy right now. You need to stay consistent in what you are not giving the OCD. It's exactly the same. And then I want to end on this question because I think it's great. How can you, I have something to say about this. So it's kind of like two questions. So how can you apply ERP in relationship OCD? And then a follow-up to that is, I'd like to have such a strong self-esteem where I don't need that reassurance. So first things first, and we get these questions all the time. How can I apply, or like, how can I do exposures for contamination OCD? Or how can I do exposures for relationship OCD? Or how do I do exposures for scrupulosity? And it's like, it totally depends. It totally depends on your triggers, right? So I wouldn't even do it anyway over a webinar, but what I would want you guys to do, ask yourself what your triggers are. So whether you keep notes of it on your phone or whether you do it on a piece of paper, identify for you, what are your triggers? What are the things that you do that are anxiety provoking? What are the things like living a day-to-day, from the morning, from when you go to bed, kind of what are the things that cause anxiety? What are your triggers? And what are the compulsions that you do? What are the things that you normally do to cope with those triggers? And then you can come up with exposures from that, right? Basically, you try to approach your fear, you try to face your fear and try not to do your compulsions. And obviously, it's not that simple. If it was that simple, then no one would need therapy. That's why we have so many good free exposure and response prevention tools on our app that are hopefully helpful. But what I wanted to convey is that we can't, it totally depends on your triggers. It totally depends, like how to do, so someone just asked, I don't know how to identify the triggers. Literally go through your day, literally take a piece of paper, and as you go through your day and something causes you to feel anxious or causes you to have an urge to do some type of ritual, write it down. Identify what caused that. I am really awful at, one of my big things is like I bite the inside of my cheek, whether I'm like bored or stressed out or driving. And so if I had to identify triggers for that, I would be like, oh, I'm chewing my cheek right now. I'm driving. You just basically write down what it is that you're doing. Or if you're waiting for a job interview and you realize that you're doing this anxiety provoking behavior, waiting for job interview, stressed out because of job interview. But you can work with a therapist on that too. And then other thing that I wanted to, and then I'll give it off to Julia because I want to hear your thoughts on this. I'd like to have such a strong self-esteem where I don't need that reassurance. You'll need to resist the behaviors first. And I know Julia is going to agree with me, right? Like, you're not going to feel better unless you resist the compulsions. You have to resist the compulsions first. You're not going to feel self-esteem or better self-esteem and then stop asking. And it's the same for any subtype, right? So you're not going to feel cleaner and then stop washing. You're not going to feel more confident that you're not a pedophile, so you stop Googling whether you're a pedophile, right? Like, you need to resist the behaviors first. You're in command over the messages that your brain is getting. You need to start giving your brain the message that these things are uncomfortable, they're not dangerous, and I'm not going to respond anymore as though it's dangerous. So you need to work on the behaviors first, reducing the avoidance, reducing the compulsions, and eventually, it's going to take some time. Like Julia mentioned earlier, it's going to take some time, but eventually your thoughts will start to change. And eventually, with continued practice, your feelings will start to change. But you're not going to feel different before you change your behaviors. And you're also not going to think differently before you start to change your behaviors. You need to change the behaviors first. Go ahead, Julia, bring it on home.
I agree with that. I really think that just staying patient and don't expect that once you do something for like a day or 2 weeks, everything is going to change. You have to put the behavior first. That's so true. And then eventually you'll start to see how you're changing on the inside. But it takes time for sure.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, this was so much fun. I have a date with my toddler to watch Paw Patrol. So I'm going to go and watch some Paw Patrol. Thank you guys so much. Sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but I hope this was helpful. Julia will be back, you guys. So Julia will be back. Yeah, so this will not be the last time that you see her. So thank you guys so much. Just another reminder that you can download our free No CD app. We're available in the marketplace. We have a free in-app community that's just incredible. So you can see how other people are overcoming their OCD. We have free support groups available there as well. And obviously, whenever you guys are ready to take that step, whenever you are able to kind of move forward with that courageous step, we're available for therapy as well. So Julia, thank you so much for taking your time and just kind of digging up your experiences with us a little bit. Thank you guys for your awesome questions, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye, everybody.
Have a good night.